The wind had the sound of old paper, dry, crumbling, and full of whispers from the past. Elias Boone rode through it like a ghost who'd lost his way home. His horse, a fading mare named Juniper, moved with the patience of something that had seen too much but still chose to keep going. The trail was no longer a trail, just a line of dust that faded into a sky the color of ash. Boone was 60 years old, maybe 61. He had stopped counting somewhere after 50. The years didn't mark themselves in numbers anymore, but in the things he'd buried: a friend, a brother's trust, and the last good piece of himself. His hat was frayed, his coat patched, and the revolver on his hip looked like it had slept in the rain for a decade. But it still worked, same as him. He had been gone 20 years. Dust Valley wasn't even on most maps now, and the few that showed it had spelled it wrong. He didn't blame them. The West didn't keep track of small places, and it erased them. He passed the old church first. The roof had caved in. The bell was gone. Where once there'd been Sunday voices, now there was only the buzz of flies and the hiss of the wind through broken windows. Boone stopped for a moment, took off his hat, and nodded to nobody in particular. Then he kept riding. By noon he reached town, or what was left of it. The saloon was leaning sideways like a drunk. The general store had a "for sale" sign hanging from one hinge. A single boy kicked a tin can down the street, stopped when he saw Boone, then ran off yelling, "Ma, someone's coming." The sound of boots still made folks nervous out here. Boone hitched Juniper outside the saloon and stepped inside. It smelled of dust and smoke long dead. Behind the bar, a man about Boone's age looked up slow, eyes narrowing like someone trying to recognize a ghost. "Elias Boone," the barkeep said finally. "I'll be damned. Thought you were dead." Boone smiled a little. "I was," he said. "Just didn't stay that way." The barkeep chuckled without humor. "What brings you back to Dust Valley?" "Ain't much here but ghosts and debt." Boone poured himself a glass of water, and the whiskey days were long behind him. "Heard my brother's still breathing. Figured I'd see him before he stops." The barkeep nodded. "Harlan's up at the North Ranch. Sickly, they say. His boys running the place now. We're trying to. Ain't easy with the railroad men buying up everything." Boone set the glass down. The sound was small but hard, like the closing of a door. "They ain't bought Boone land yet." The barkeep sighed. "They will, Elias. They always do." Boone didn't answer. He stepped out into the sunlight, and the town stared back. Quiet, watching, suspicious. He tipped his hat to no one in particular and rode north. The Boone ranch sat under a sky that looked too big for what was left of it. The fence had holes big enough to walk through. The barn leaned like it was tired. A young man, maybe 25, came out of the house, wiping sweat from his brow. "You lost, mister?" the boy asked. Boone smiled faintly. "Not anymore." The boy stared, eyes narrowing. "You, Elias Boone?" "That's what they used to call me." The boy nodded slowly. "I'm Luke, Harlan's boy." Boone climbed down from his horse. "You look like your father, only taller and angrier." Luke frowned. "You left him to fend for himself." Boone didn't argue. He just said, "Where is he?" Inside, the house smelled of old wood, sickness, and dust. Harlan Boone lay on a narrow bed, thinner than the man Elias remembered. Gray hair, gray eyes, and a cough that rattled like pebbles in a can. When he saw his brother, he tried to sit up but couldn't. "I thought you'd never come back," Harlan rasped. "I didn't plan to," Boone said softly, pulling a chair close. "But plans change." They sat in silence for a long while. Outside, the wind moved the curtains like ghosts. "You still carry it?" Harlan asked finally, nodding toward the revolver. Boone looked down. "Ain't much use for it now." "There wasn't much use for it then," Harlan said, coughing hard. "Avery's grave's still out back of the church. You visit it yet?" "Not yet. Maybe you should." Boone stared out the window. The past was a long road, and he was tired of riding it, but somehow it always found him. "You still believe I meant to shoot him?" Harlan sighed. "Doesn't matter what I believe. He's dead. You ain't, that's all folks remember." Boone stayed until the coughing turned to sleep. Then he walked outside and sat on the porch. The sun was dipping low, the kind of light that turned everything gold before it turned everything dark. Luke came around the side, wiping grease from his hands. "You fixin' to stay?" the boy asked. Boone nodded. "For a while. Pa says the land ain't ours much longer. Company's got papers. They're coming soon to take it." Boone looked out at the hills. The grass was dying, but the land still looked alive somehow, stubborn like all Boones were. Then I reckon I'll stay long enough to see who's right. Luke frowned. You gonna fight them? Boone didn't answer right away. He reached down, picked up a handful of dust and let it blow away in the wind. Ain't looking for a fight, he said quietly. But I ain't scared of one neither. Night came slow and heavy. The old drifter sat by the fire inside, oil lamp flickering against the walls. He took off his hat, stared at the revolver lying on the table. The metal still gleamed faintly, a cruel reminder of the life he couldn't outrun. He thought of Avery, the marshal with the steady hand, the friend who'd shared whiskey and laughter before the bullet changed everything. Boone whispered into the empty room. Didn't mean to, Avery, you know that. But the silence didn't answer. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of far-off thunder. Not a storm yet, but a promise. The West had a way of keeping its promises. Boone leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the fire's warmth touch his face. He'd come back for peace. But peace was a thing the West never truly offered. It was just another kind of waiting, the kind that came before something broke, and out beyond the ridge where the land turned to shadow, a single train whistle cried, long, low, and lonely, carrying the sound of the future into a place still haunted by the past. The next morning, Boone woke to the sound of hammers. Luke was outside fixing the fence line with a determination that looked borrowed from someone older. The sun was barely up, but sweat already streaked his shirt. Boone stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching quietly. You fixin' fences for cows you ain't got? Boone finally said. Luke didn't stop hammering. Fence ain't for cows. It's for the men coming to take this place. Boone nodded slowly. Then I'll help. By noon, they were side by side, digging posts, stretching wire. Boone's hands bled by the third post. It didn't bother him. There was a comfort in hard work, something that didn't ask for forgiveness, only effort. That afternoon, a wagon rolled up in a cloud of dust. Two men stepped down, dressed too fine for the valley. Suits, polished boots, clean faces. Boone could smell the city on them. One was tall and thin with a mustache trimmed sharp as a knife. The other was short and round, sweating through his collar. Afternoon, the tall one called. Name's Mr. Galloway, representative of the Dust Valley Mining and Rail Company. This your land? Luke wiped his brow. It's Boone land. Well, son, Galloway said with a salesman's smile. The company's been buying parcels all over. We've got big plans, railroads, mining camps, real progress. We're offering fair money to every landholder. Boone stepped forward, voice calm but heavy. And if we don't sell? Galloway's smile didn't move, but his eyes hardened. Then we let the law do what it's meant to. Progress don't wait for sentiment, mister. Boone, Elias said flatly. Recognition flickered in the man's face. Boone, as in Elias Boone? That's right. Galloway cleared his throat. Well, I'm sure a man like you knows change can't be stopped. You either get behind it or it rolls right over you. Boone glanced at Luke. You best ride back to town, Mr. Galloway. Tell your bosses this land ain't for sale. The fat man opened his mouth, but Galloway stopped him with a hand. Suit yourself, he said, climbing back on the wagon. But when the lawman comes with the papers, don't say we didn't give you a chance. As they rode away, Luke spat in the dust. You think they'll come back? Boone nodded. Ain't a thing surer in this world. That evening, Boone rode into town to speak with Sheriff Cobb. The sheriff's office was the only building that still looked alive. Cobb himself sat behind his desk, boots up, pipe smoke curling around his weathered face. He looked up when Boone walked in. Well, hell, Cobb muttered, smiling faintly. I figured if I ignored the rumors long enough, you'd stay dead. Sorry to disappoint, Boone said, taking a seat. You always were trouble, Elias. What brings you to my side of town? Mining men, Boone said. Galloway and his boys. They're buying up the valley, Cobb sighed. Yeah, they're not just buying. They've got court papers, deeds, the governor's backing. You go against them, you go against the law. Boone's eyes didn't waver. That law written in ink or blood, Cobb? Cobb stared at him for a long moment, then leaned back. The kind written by men who don't know this land, who never wrote it, never bled on it, but it's still the law. I ain't here to fight you, Boone said softly. But if they come for my brother's land, I'll stand my ground. Cobb blew out a puff of smoke. And what happens when the company sends men with more guns than you can count? Boone smiled faintly. Then I'll count slow. Cobb chuckled, shaking his head. You never did learn when to quit, Boone stood. Maybe that's why I'm still alive. Before he left, Cobb called out, voice lower now. Elias, the world's changin'. Don't go dying for one that's already gone. Boone stopped at the door. Maybe, but this one's still mine. When he got back to the ranch, night had already fallen. Harlan sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, a lantern flickering beside him. His cough had grown worse. Cobb tell you to let it go? Harlan asked. Something like that. And you listened? Boone shook his head. You know me better. Harlan sighed. You always were the fool brother. Boone smiled. You always were the smart one. Don't seem like it did either of us much good. They both laughed. The kind of laugh that hurts but heals a little too. Over the next few days, Boone started visiting the neighbors. What few there were left. Old Joe Carter, who'd lost a leg to a stampede but still kept 50 head of cattle. Tom Finley, half-blind but a crack shot when sober. And Reverend Pike, who'd traded his Bible for a shotgun when the mining company burned down his church in the next county. Boone gathered them all in Harlan's barn one evening. The wind howled outside and the lantern light threw long shadows across their faces. I ain't asking you men to fight for me, Boone said, but I ain't letting strangers take what's ours without a word. Old Joe snorted. They got deeds, Elias. You can't shoot paper. No, Boone said quietly, but paper don't hold a man's soul. Land does, Reverend Pike nodded. You plan to make a stand? Boone looked around the room. Just want them to know Dust Valley ain't dead yet. They agreed one by one. Not because they believed they could win, but because some things weren't about winning. For 2 weeks, Boone trained them. He taught Luke to aim steady, not fast. A quick hand's a dead man's hand, he said. You shoot to end trouble, not start it. He showed the old man how to move quiet, how to watch the ridges for riders. It wasn't war. It was memory turned to muscle. One night, as they sat around the fire, Luke asked, Why'd you really come back, Uncle? Boone stared into the flames. To rest, he said. But rest don't come easy to men like me. Luke was quiet for a while. You killed a man once, Marshall Avery. Boone didn't flinch. Yeah, he was my friend. We drew at the same time, him for the law, me for pride. Pride won. You regret it? Boone looked at the stars. Every sunrise since. The boy nodded, understanding more than he said. The next morning, a dust cloud rose on the horizon. Galloway was back, only this time he wasn't smiling. A dozen riders flanked him, rifles glinting. Boone stepped out to meet them. Luke stood beside him, hand near his gun. Still ain't selling? Galloway asked. No, Boone said. Then I reckon you'll be hearing from the judge. Boone smirked. You bringing him on that horse? Galloway's face darkened. This is your last chance. Boone's hand rested easy on his revolver. Every man's got a last chance, Galloway. I already had mine 20 years ago. The two men stared at each other until Galloway turned his horse. You'll regret this, he said. Boone watched them ride away. Then he turned to Luke. They'll come back with more men and they won't be wearing suits. Luke nodded. What do we do now? Boone looked toward the hills. We get ready. The West might be dying, boy, but it ain't gonna die quiet. That night, lightning cracked in the distance, flashing over the valley like old gunfire. The wind carried the smell of rain and iron. Boone stood alone outside the barn, watching the horizon. The land stretched before him, battered, stubborn, alive. He took off his hat, ran a hand through gray hair, and whispered to the darkness, If this is the end, then let it come honest. The thunder answered, low and steady, like a drum calling men to one last stand. The rains came heavy that week, thick, muddy storms that drowned the roads and turned the valley into a basin of silence. But when the clouds cleared, a new sound filled the land, a low, rhythmic pounding that shook the ground beneath the boots of every man still loyal to Dust Valley. It was the sound of a train. Boone stood on the ridge with Luke and old Joe, squinting against the morning glare. Down below, a black line of steel and smoke cut through the plain. Men hammering rails, mules dragging timber, the hiss of steam and the clang of metal. The company had brought its army. They ain't wasting time, Joe muttered. That line's headed straight through Boone land. Boone didn't answer. He watched the rail crews, the hired guns walking among them like shepherds with rifles instead of staffs. The company had done what Boone always feared. They'd turned the West into a factory. Luke kicked at the dirt. We can't fight that many men. No, Boone said quietly. But we can slow 'em down. That night the men gathered in the barn again. Lantern light painted their faces in amber and shadow. Reverend Pike had a map spread across a barrel, and Tom Finley squinted at it through one good eye. "They're running the tracks along the canyon," Pike said, tapping the map. "Steep ground. One good break there and it'll take 'em weeks to fix." Boone nodded. "We'll head out after dark. No shooting, no killing. Just break the line and vanish." Joe grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Hell, feels good to be young again." Boone almost smiled. "Ain't about being young, Joe, it's about being remembered." They rode out at dusk, 6 men and 1 boy. The sky was painted with streaks of crimson and ash, the kind of sunset that made even the land look tired. Juniper led the way, her hooves soft against the damp earth. Boone carried no badge, no star, just the old revolver and a coil of dynamite wrapped in oilcloth. When they reached the canyon, the moon was climbing. The rails glistened like snakes under silver light. Far off, a campfire burned, the company's night crew, unaware of the ghosts moving in the dark. Boone crouched low, voice barely a whisper. "Joe, Pike, take the west end. Luke, you're with me. We planted under the bend, there." He pointed toward a curve where the track hung above a dry ravine. "One charge'll bring half that hillside down." Luke nodded, eyes wide. "You sure we're doing right?" Boone looked at him, the moonlight catching the scars along his cheek. "Right's a word for men with choices, boy. We ain't got those no more." They worked in silence. The old men moved like shadows, every motion deliberate, reverent almost. Boone's hands were steady as he packed the charge. The smell of wet earth and oil filled the air. Just as he lit the fuse, a sound cut through the quiet. The sharp click of a rifle being cocked. "Step away," a voice said. Boone turned slowly. A figure stood in the moonlight, rifle leveled. The face was young, hard, but familiar. "Cal Avery," Boone said softly. The name hung between them like smoke. Cal's voice was tight. "Didn't think I'd find you here, Boone. You were supposed to be dead." Boone straightened. "You look like your father." "That's funny," Cal said, eyes narrowing. "You don't." Luke's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Boone stopped him with a glance. "You working for the company?" "Work's work," Cal said. "Pays better than revenge. But I'll take both if I can." Boone sighed. "Your father was a good man, Cal. I never meant—" "Save it," Cal snapped. "He died because you wanted to be faster." Boone nodded. "You're right." Cal hesitated, thrown off by the answer. Boone continued, voice low. "You got every right to hate me, but this ain't justice. It's just money. And it'll chew you up same as it chewed me." Cal's jaw tightened. "Step back, Boone. I can't let you blow that line." Boone studied him for a long moment. "Then you best shoot me now." The fuse hissed behind him. Time was running out. Cal's finger tightened on the trigger, and then far off thunder cracked. Or maybe it was just the fuse meeting the powder. The explosion ripped through the canyon. The ground bucked, the rails screamed, and a wall of rock came crashing down in a roar of dust and echo. Cal was thrown backward, his rifle clattering away. Boone shielded Luke with his body as stones rained down around them. When the dust cleared, the tracks were gone, twisted and broken, buried under half the hillside. The train line was dead. Boone coughed, tasting grit. "Let's move," he rasped. Luke hesitated, looking at Cal, who lay half-buried, dazed but alive. Boone limped over, grabbed the young man by the arm, and pulled him free. "You're your father's son," he said. "Don't die stupid." Cal stared at him, speechless, as Boone and Luke disappeared into the dark. By dawn, word had spread. The company men stormed through Dust Valley, searching barns and cellars, questioning anyone with a horse. Cobb rode out himself to the Boone ranch, his face grim. He found Boone on the porch, drinking black coffee like it was just another morning. "You're a damn fool," Cobb said quietly. "They'll hang you for this," Boone nodded. "Maybe. You blow up company property, Elias. That's sabotage. Better than surrender." Cobb rubbed his temples. "You think this'll stop them?" "They'll just bring more men, more steel." Boone looked out over the hills. "Then they'll find the valley still here." "That's enough." The sheriff exhaled hard. "I ought to take you in." "Then do it." Cobb stared at him, jaw tight, then shook his head. "Hell, Boone. I ain't never been good at arresting ghosts." He turned to leave, but stopped at the gate. "Cal Avery's alive. He told him you saved him. That's the only reason they ain't stringing you up already." Boone nodded slowly. His father would have done the same. Cobb mounted his horse. "You're making things worse, Elias. They'll come back meaner next time." Boone smiled faintly. Then I'll be ready." That night, Boone sat alone by the fire. The others had gone home tired and proud and scared all at once. The dynamite had bought them time, nothing more. He took out his revolver, turned it in his hands, the metal glinting like memory. He thought of Avery, the friend he'd killed, the son he'd spared. He thought of Harlan, coughing himself to death in the next room. He thought of the West, once wild, now tamed by rails and greed. Outside, Juniper snorted softly, restless. Boone whispered, "I know, girl." Ain't long now. In the distance, far beyond the ruined tracks, another whistle blew, faint, distant, but coming closer. The company wasn't done. Boone looked out the window toward the horizon. The stars shimmered above the black hills, and for the first time in years he felt something like peace, not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. The air in Dust Valley felt like old leather, cracked, dry, and worn thin from too many years of wind and silence. Boone and Elias rode in at sundown, two figures swallowed by a horizon of orange fire and shadow. The town sat there like a half-dead memory, buildings with their backs broken, signs faded to ghosts, and tumbleweeds rolling through what used to be Main Street. "Didn't think I'd see this place again," Elias muttered, pulling the brim of his hat low as if to block the ghosts from looking at him. Boone didn't answer. His jaw worked quietly as he chewed a piece of dry tobacco, eyes fixed on the sheriff's office ahead. The sign above the door read Dust Valley Marshal, letters eaten by sun and time. Inside, behind the dusty window, a shape moved. Boone knew that shape. Even after 20 years, he'd have known it anywhere. "Marshal Clay Torrens," Boone said softly. The name came out like a curse wrapped in smoke. Clay Torrens had been Boone's partner once, back when they both wore the star and believed the law could tame the frontier. Then came the Red Mesa job, the betrayal and the blood that followed. Boone had lost his brother and his badge that day. Torrens had gained everything, land, title, and the reputation of a hero. But legends had a way of rotting from the inside, and tonight Boone had come to open the wound. Elias looked at Boone's hands, steady, strong, but trembling slightly near the trigger. "You sure about this, Boone? Ain't no good ending waiting in that office." Boone spit the tobacco into the dirt. "There never was any good ending for men like us." They tied their horses near the saloon, now a hollow shell echoing with the ghosts of laughter. As Boone stepped onto the creaking porch of the marshal's office, the door swung open. Clay Torrens stepped out, older, grayer, but still carrying that air of command that once made him the law around here. His eyes met Boone's, and for a heartbeat, neither man moved. "Well," Torrens said, voice like gravel, "the dead do rise after all." Boone's reply came low and cold. "Some of us never got to die proper." For a moment the years vanished. The two men stood face to face, not lawmen, not outlaws, just remnants of a world that had burned itself out. Boone saw the gleam of Torrens' badge polished to a shine that didn't match the dust around it. That shine made his blood burn. "You came back for revenge," Torrens said, hand inching toward his holster. "But I did what I had to do. You were reckless. Your brother was worse." "I kept the peace," Boone's eyes narrowed. "You sold us out to the rail company. You called it peace while my brother bled out in the sand." The street had gone still. Even the wind held its breath. Elias stood near the saloon, hand on his gun but unwilling to interfere. This wasn't his fight. It was old business, older than either man's pride. Torrens took a step forward. "You think killing me'll bring him back?" Boone's voice came steady as a drawn blade. "No, but it'll set the ground right." The sound of boots on dry boards. The heavy weight of silence. Then boom, the gunfire tore through the stillness. A single shot, quick and true. Boone staggered, a red bloom spreading through his coat. Torrens's hand was still on his holster. Smoke rising. Elias shouted, running forward, but Boone raised a trembling hand to stop him. "Don't," Boone rasped. "This is mine." He looked up, eyes locked on Torrens. The marshal's face twitched just slightly. Guilt or fear, Boone couldn't tell. Boone's revolver came up slow but steady and fired once. The shot hit true. Torrens fell backward through the office doorway, his badge clattering to the floor beside him. Boone swayed, dropping his gun, and leaned against the post. Blood ran down his arm, warm and dark. Elias caught him before he fell. "You damn fool," Elias muttered, voice shaking. "You couldn't just walk away." Boone smiled weakly, teeth red. Ain't no walking away from your own shadow. He looked toward the fading horizon, the sun melting into a band of gold and ash. The town seemed quieter now, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. Boone closed his eyes. When the night came, Elias buried both men on the ridge overlooking the valley. One grave bore a badge, the other a worn leather hat. The stars came out cold and clear, whispering like old friends. Elias stood there a long while, hat in hand. He wasn't sure what Boone had found in the end, peace, vengeance, or just the silence he'd been chasing all his life. But as the wind swept over the graves and down into the empty town, it felt like Dust Valley finally breathed again. The West didn't mourn. It just moved on, carrying the weight of men like Boone and Torrens in its dust. The dawn came soft over Dust Valley, spilling pale gold across the ridge where 2 mounds of fresh dirt marked the end of old legends. The wind moved gentle, carrying the smell of sage and gunpowder, and for the first time in years the land felt still, like it had finally exhaled. Elias sat by the graves with his coffee tin balanced on a rock, his coat wrapped tight against the morning chill. Boone's hat rested on one mound, sun-bleached and weathered, its brim curled from years of desert wind. On the other mound lay a tin star, still shining faintly in the new light. Between them, the valley stretched out endless and quiet, a sea of dust and memory. Elias took a long sip, the bitter taste grounding him. He'd buried a friend and an enemy yesterday, though by the end he wasn't sure which was which. The line between good and bad had worn thin in this country, like everything else. He spoke softly, not sure if he was talking to the graves or himself. You got your reckoning. Boone, maybe that's more than most men get. The words faded into the wind. A hawk circled overhead, crying once before vanishing toward the sun. Elias stood, brushed the dust from his coat, and started walking down toward town. Dust Valley looked different now, or maybe he was just seeing it for what it really was. The saloon stood empty but proud, doors swinging lazily as if waiting for the next story to walk in. The blacksmith's shed had half collapsed and the old church bell hung silent. But in the quiet, Elias could almost hear the echoes, laughter spilling from the saloon, boots on the boardwalk, music on Saturday nights. He passed by the sheriff's office, the door still hanging open. Inside, Clay Torrens's desk sat neat and ordered, papers stacked just so, rifle leaned in the corner. On the wall behind it, an old map of the county, rail lines drawn in pencil, names of towns crossed out. So many gone, so many forgotten. Elias took down the badge from where it had fallen and turned it in his palm. It was cold heavy, a piece of iron that had once meant justice, now just another relic. He set it on the desk and whispered, "Rest easy, Marshal. You paid your due." Outside, the wind shifted, bringing with it the faint sound of hooves. Elias looked up. A single rider was coming in from the east, a young man, lean, dust-covered, barely 20. His horse looked half-starved and his eyes were wide, uncertain. The boy stopped at the edge of town, looking around like he'd stumbled into the ruins of a story he'd heard as a child. "You the sheriff here?" he called out. Elias almost laughed. "Ain't no sheriff here, son. Town's dead." The boy dismounted slowly, glancing around. "Name's Billy Nash. Heard there was work to be had. Folks said Dust Valley's where men start over." Elias shook his head. "Those folks lied. There ain't nothing here but ghosts." Billy frowned, squinting at the graves up on the ridge. "Then whose town is it now?" Elias thought for a long moment. "Maybe it's yours if you're fool enough to stay." The boy smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from not knowing the cost of things yet. "Then I reckon I'll stay a while." Elias studied him. There was something in that face, young, full of fire and foolishness, that reminded him of Boone when they first rode together. Same look of a man chasing a dream that'd chew him up if he wasn't careful. He nodded slowly. "There's an old stable down the road. Fix it up, you might make something of it. Just don't go looking for legends. This town's seen enough of those." The boy tipped his hat. "Appreciate it." As Billy led his horse away, Elias watched him go, a strange feeling settling in his chest, something between sorrow and hope. Maybe that was how the West survived. Not through the men who'd fought and died, but through the ones who came after, still believing there was something worth saving in all this dust. By noon, Elias had his horse saddled. He took one last look at the town, The street, the saloon, the office where Boone fell. He whispered a small prayer that wasn't quite a prayer. May you rest, old friend. The trail's long enough for both of us now. Then he turned his horse west, toward the far horizon where the land rose in soft waves of gold and shadow. The sky stretched wide above him, endless and forgiving. For miles he rode without speaking, only the sound of hooves and wind. Every so often he'd glance back and see the faint outline of Dust Valley shrinking behind him, a scar fading into the skin of the earth. He thought of all the men he'd known. Boone. Torrens, the brothers who never came home. The outlaws who became stories. The world was changing now. Railroads cutting through the land, towns springing up where buffalo once ran. The Wild West was dying, and maybe that was all right. Everything had its season. As the sun began to fall, Elias reached a ridge overlooking a river that wound silver through the plain. He dismounted, sat down, and pulled his flask from his coat. He drank slow, watching the sky bleed into red and purple. He thought about Boone's last words. Ain't no walking away from your own shadow. Maybe Boone had been right. But Elias reckoned you could ride far enough that the shadow softened, turned into something gentler. When night came, he built a small fire and leaned back against his saddle, hat tilted low. The stars came out, bright and endless, whispering the same old stories they'd always told. Somewhere out there, Boone's spirit rode the long trail west, free of the burdens that had chained him. Elias smiled faintly, a weary peace in his heart. Tomorrow he'd keep riding. Maybe north to the mountains, maybe nowhere at all. Because that's what the Old West did. It never ended. It just stretched on, quiet and vast, waiting for the next soul to cross it. And as the fire cracked and the wind hummed through the sage, Elias closed his eyes. The horizon glowed faintly under the stars, not an end, but a promise. The West wasn't gone. It was just asleep, dreaming under the dust.